Kept You Like an Oath. Written by Chase McQueen. Read by Arashi. Dull steps echo through the empty rock passageway, its walls bare, except for the odd torch to lend a light to any passer-by. Sir Ajax was the lone subject walking through the cold hallways of Zapolnyarny Palace, beckoned to attend the prompt summon of his queen. However, no matter how much he mused on what this court meeting could be about, his mind remained elsewhere. More specifically, a couple of countries away, in the nation of Sumeru. It had only been a couple of weeks since he'd come back to Snezhnaya, and had been pulled back from the duties assigned to him in the nation of the forest and desert. Had it really been so little time, though? It seemed to him like an eternity had passed since he last saw Princess Lumine of Irminsul. How long had it been since he'd been stationed as her sworn protector? A few months? A full year? He wasn't completely sure, for all the time spent together with her blurred together into this warm, beautiful bliss that he couldn't have believed possible before meeting her. Before her, Sir Ajax had been nothing but a honed weapon of war, his purpose only the one the Tsaritsa commanded of him. Before her, Ajax had concluded that he hadn't been cut out for love, that it wasn't in his future. But now, she was the only thing he could think about, the person who stole his breath away and made his heart flutter in a way that reminded him he was alive, something he thought he had forgotten since he was 14 years old. Lumine's radiancy and kindness had cracked the hard exterior that Ajax had forged around himself to survive in the court of Snezhnaya. Unbeknownst to him, the warmth of the princess returned a piece of his soul he hadn't known since he was a teenager, a piece he could have sworn he wouldn't know again. He stopped in his tracks. Ajax had been so absorbed in his thoughts that he hadn't noticed he'd arrived at his destination. Before him stood two tall, heavy wooden doors, with Fatui agents posed at its front. He nodded at them, recalling the coldness and ruthlessness he had to use to be feared and respected by his underlings. On the other side, the Tsaritsa awaited, sitting on her magnificent throne and surrounded by some of her other knights, his fellow comrades. She was the image of poise and elegance. The leader of the Crow Nation had hardened herself for the sake of her subjects, and would always put Snezhnaya's interests ahead of anything else. Such had been the reason Ajax had sworn his loyalty to her many years ago. His armor clinked together as he bent the knee, his long, red cape flowing behind him in the light draught of the room. "Your Majesty," he solemnly said, bowing his head before his ruler. "Rise, Sir Ajax." Her voice was as melodic as a bird song, ringing like wind chimes. He raised his right hand to his chest, his fist over his heart, as a sign of his unbent fidelity and devotion to her. "I put myself at your disposal, my queen. To what do I owe the honor of your summon?" Sir Ajax knew better than to beat around the bush, and when the Tsaritsa smiled ever so slightly, she did so as a token of appreciation for his straightforwardness. "I must thank you, Sir Ajax. The reports you brought back from the nation of Sumeru have been more than useful in our diplomatic mission there, especially when it comes to the Fey people of Irminsul." His eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly, but he was a second too late to hide the shock on his face. He hadn't imagined that his mission had deemed results so quickly. But this was good news, wasn't it? Maybe that meant he'd be able to go back to Lumine faster. They seemed to have some sort of power that is greater than ours. Ajax blinked slowly. What did that have to do with anything? "Yes, Your Majesty. The life and energy given to them by the Irminsul tree is greater than anything I've ever witnessed." There was a long pause that Sir Ajax described as cold and ominous. Something wasn't right. The Tsaritsa looked at her immaculate fingernails, as if her next words would be of little consequence. "Imagine holding all of that power The greatness it would bring to Snezhnaya. A chill darted down the knight's spine. Your Majesty? Against all odds, the people of Irminsul have thrived on its power, almost to the point where they're compatible to our technological advances. One can only imagine the great power that would come from combining forces. My queen. Ajax didn't like where the conversation seemed to be going. The people of Irminsul don't harness the tree's energy. They live aligned to it, following its flow in harmony. Don't be a fool, Sir Ajax. She sharply cut him off. That's what the Fae want you to believe. They're keeping all that power to themselves. Such selfish creatures. Ajax knew the Fae well, after all that time spent among them. He acquiesced them to be many things, but selfish wasn't one of them. If they choose to behave in such a way, hoarding the tree's blessings to themselves, Snezhnaya has no choice but to intervene. Zepelnyarny Palace was widely known for its glacial indoor temperatures, but Ajax could have sworn that the temperature grew even colder right there and then. There couldn't be anything more frigid than the calculated plans of the Tsaritsa. His azure eyes wide as saucers, Ajax let go of any and all formalities in his bewilderment, knowing full well the high punishment he could have faced for such an action had he not been part of the Queen's Guard. Your Majesty, you don't understand. The tree is their source of life. The Fae folk wouldn't be able to survive without it. She turned to the rest of her sworn knights, as if he hadn't spoken at all. Sir Piero, prepare the battalions and gather the soldiers. We march on Sumeru at first light. As you wish, Your Majesty, her closest knight asserted. A bright smile and a soft laugh he had memorized quite well were all that Ajax was able to think when he blurted out, You will kill them? Icy eyes settled on him, deadly as a piercing blade. Pardon me, Sir Ajax. I thought I might have misheard you. The knight could only regard his queen in confusion, not sure what she was referring to. I should be sorely mistaken. She slowly stepped down from her dais, getting closer to him with every stride she took, because, for a moment, it seemed as though you cared more for the Fae than you do for your own people, for your own country. Ajax wasn't oblivious to the hidden statement behind the Tsaritsa's words. She was only a smidge short of accusing him of treason, his fists impulsively clenched. But I believe that you are sworn to me, are you not? A challenge in between the lines. Ajax knew what he needed to do to be able to walk out of her throne room with his head still on his shoulders. He bowed his head in surrender. I am, Your Majesty. And you swore to defend my interests and the interests of Snezhnaya, did you not? His fist found its way to his heart once again, as trembling as it was. I did, Your Majesty. Well then, a satisfied yet somewhat wicked smile spread across her delicate, crimson lips. I expect nothing but excellence from the best knights in Snezhnaya, especially from my vanguard, my best weapon. Besides, insubordination shall not be handled kindly. Time stopped. Ajax held his breath, but didn't break his posture. The Tsaritsa raised his head up with a long nailed finger, the gesture so tender one couldn't have felt the tension had it not been hanging in the air thick as a dense fog. Was I clear, Sir Ajax? He valiantly held her stare. Crystal clear, Your Highness. She seemed appeased by his answer, but Ajax was trying to still the quickening beat of his heart. Good. Ready to fulfill your duty to the Queen, then. We have a nation to invade. He had to warn her. Ajax urged his Shire mare to go faster, as quickly as the near-frozen roads of Snezhnaya allowed her to. He only had a night to gain the advantage of the Snezhnayan army, and while they would be slowed down by the number of bodies being dragged from one nation to the other, it wouldn't be by a lot. The roaring of his heartbeat in his ears drowned any other sounds in the near vicinity, making him solely focus on his task. I must warn Princess Lumine. I cannot lose her. A light flurry of snow fell upon them, and Ajax could only pray to the Archons that it wouldn't become a blizzard before he made it to the frontier. If he kept going at that pace, and only stopped to tend to his horse, he could reach Sumeru by... Something struck his attention from the corner of his eye. He barely had time to turn and catch a glimpse of the foreign object, a lavender flower, known as a padasara, a Sumerian plant that had no business growing in the snowy landscape of Snezhnaya. He brought his horse to a sudden halt, miraculously staying on his saddle. "Come on, girl, let's check it out," he said to his mare, tugging on the reins to go back to the flower. What he found when he came back was even more extraordinary than just an exotic blossom. Princess Lumine herself stood under the drift, soft snowflakes landing on her golden locks. She wore only a thin umber cape over a frilly-looking dress as a shield from the harsh weather, and he could see the tips of her pointy ears were a bit flushed from the cold. Ajax was so taken aback by her sudden appearance, he didn't notice the apprehension in her eyes. "Lumine!" the knight screamed, as he descended from the horseback in a swift movement, reaching his princess in only a couple of strides, and spinning her around in his arms once he did so. She wasn't just a product of his longing imagination. She was truly there with him. He carefully put her down, his gloved hand cradling her cheek, and his eyes full of loving affection. "How are you here? Why are you here?" Lumine looked up at him with her amber eyes brimming with tenderness and yearning, but with creases of worry around them. "I teleported through the Statue of the Seven. The why is... complicated." His eyebrows narrowed in puzzlement. Then he remembered the reason why he was on this desolate road in the middle of nowhere. "Lumine, we have to go back to Sumeru. The Tsaritsa, the people of Irminsul, you—" "I know," she said calmly, her much smaller hand settling on his. "That's why I'm here." Ajax thought he couldn't be more baffled, but he couldn't have been more mistaken. Something in Lumine's expression told him she wasn't lying, that she knew exactly what was going on. "But how?" "The Irminsul tree showed me a vision." She lowered her gaze, ashamed of what she was about to reveal. "I didn't mean to spy on you, but I saw you in the Queen's throne room. She was plotting a war, an invasion, and you were pledging your loyalty to her." There was a ringing in his ears when he heard those words coming out of her mouth. How could she have seen that? Did she really think that... Lumine never showed fear. She remained as brave and strong as he knew her to be. But there was definitely something else in her expression when she faced him again. Doubt. Hurt. "It's not true, is it? You wouldn't do that to us. You wouldn't betray us, would you?" A savage rage roared inside him at the mere insinuation, and his heart broke at her unspoken words. "You wouldn't betray me, would you?" Ajax grabbed both of her hands and raised them to his lips, planting a devoted kiss on her fingers. "Lumine, I would never dream of doing such a thing. I said what I had to say to get out of there, to make my way back to you and your people, and warn you. We have to be ready when the Tsaritsa and her troops arrive, because they won't hold back. They won't stop until she has what she wants." "But Irminsul is not—"
"I know."
He nestled his hand behind her head, his fingers interlacing in her curls.
"But the Tsaritsa won't listen. Once her mind is set on something, there is no dissuading her. We have to prepare the defenses. Be ready for when they attack."
"But there aren't too many of us."
"But you're strong, Lumine," Ajax insisted, fire behind his eyes. There is a fierceness to your people that is unmatchable. You are united. You fight like a well-oiled machine. You're stronger than any other person I've ever met. He wasn't sure when his description had shifted from her people to her. Lumine, you are the most fearsome warrior I've ever had the honor to duel with. You are as devoted to your people and their welfare as any respectable leader should be. 7 hells, the Tsaritsa could use a teaching or two from you. That teared up a giggle from the Fey princess, amused at the thought of her teaching the Tsaritsa anything. But Ajax wasn't done. He kneeled in front of her, unsheathing his sword and offering it to her. I put myself at your total disposal, a loyal soldier willing to fight for you and protect you, and if need be, give my life for you.
Ajax!
I mean it, Princesa.
His impassioned eyes met hers, and Ajax was completely sure that his vows were true. Whatever loyalty he had once pledged to the Tsaritsa meant nothing compared to the ardent devotion he felt for this princess from another land.
If I am to die on the battlefield, let it be by your side, and if not, shielding you from harm.
Lumine was frozen in place by his words. She never thought that anyone would make such pledges to her, let alone a human from a distant nation. Then again, Ajax had always surprised her. That was what she loved about him. His love had always been evident in the small details, fleeting kisses on the dorsal of her hand, worrying hugs at the mere thought of something bad happening to her, learning about her culture and customs, and going along with her antics, no matter how silly they seemed to him. Ajax had shown the princess love in a way she'd never imagined she would feel it, for how else would she have agreed to be with a human that wouldn't have nearly the same lifespan she did? When she'd been shown the throne room vision, Lumine had only doubted Ajax for a split second. He always talked so reverently of his beloved queen, a woman with dreams of greatness for her people and fierce determination to protect them, a sentiment the princess knew quite well. But when her knight looked at her, Ajax made her feel like he had lived his whole life just to meet her, to be with her. The red string of fate, whose existence she always denied, suddenly came to life, certainly and firmly attached to the Shneznayan knight. She knew in her heart that he'd never let anything happen to her. That was why she'd trusted him blindly all this time, why it had pained her to see him return to his homeland once he had been summoned. The thought of being without him was unbearable. Lumine silently thanked the 7 and the Irminsul for letting her see her beloved again, free from harm, and with his true heart still set on her. Carefully, she took the sword from Ajax's hands and tossed it to the side. The princess knelt with him, her hands raising his face so that he'd meet her gaze. "Don't you dare die on me," she said with a firm voice, deciding to hide all of the anguish and fear she felt inside. "If you die in this war, Sir Ajax, I will never forgive you. I will walk on every confine of Celestia and the abyss if I need to, until I find you. And may the Archons protect you from my wrath when I do." The knight circled the Fae's waist with a familiarity proper of their love. His chapped lips found hers in a heartbeat, conveying in his kiss how much he'd missed her in just the few days they'd been separated. Lumine tilted her face to the side to have better access to his mouth, careful so as not to hurt him. Amid the bitter snowscape, they remained warm because of some presence or the other, unbothered by the cold. However, someone stalked them as prey. They'd seen more than enough, and so their guise amidst the pine forest wasn't needed any more. Ajax's mare neighed at the impending menace. "Well, well, well, what have we here? A trespasser and a traitor." Heavy footsteps crushed the snow underneath them. Ajax and Lumine separated and looked at the undesirable onlooker in shock, the knight quickly getting on his feet, and in front of the Fey princess, Piero. He simply acknowledged the spectator, the word coming out a hiss between his teeth.
"You followed me." "As per Her Majesty's orders,"
the Queen's closest knight confirmed, even though he knew Ajax wasn't asking.
"You fooled no one with your half-hearted pledge, Sir Ajax. You should know better than to try and fool the Tsaritsa herself. However, she did say that letting you go would be resourceful."
Piero eyed Lumine with a predatory glance, and the princess couldn't help the urge to press harder against Ajax's body. He, on the other hand, didn't move a muscle, and glared at his commanding officer without cowering back.
"Turn her over, Ajax."
Piero extended a hand forward, beckoning the Fae to him.
"And your punishment might be lessened." "Over my dead body!"
he snarled. Piero snickered in response, knowing full well that Ajax would deny him.
"As you wish."
"Ajax!" Lumine pleaded behind him, her voice barely higher than a whisper.
"Go,"
Ajax muttered, so that only she could hear.
"Get to the Statue of the Seven. Go back. Warn them."
"I won't leave you!"
"You must,"
he urged, as he picked up his sword from the ground, getting ready for the fight that would surely follow.
"You're their only hope, Lumine. You have to protect your people."
"But what about you?"
"I'll be fine, Princesa."
His voice sounded more panicked by the second, even though he was trying to remain calm for her sake.
"I'll be right behind you. I promise."
Lumine's eyes jumped over from him to Piero, knowing the power the Queen's first knight possessed. However, Ajax was right. There was no other way. Thousands of lives depended on her. She needed to go back to them before it was too late.
"Don't you dare break that promise, my knight,"
she growled when she saw the hopelessness of the situation, holding on to his bicep. She wasn't quite sure if the gesture was supposed to reassure him of her presence, or vice versa, but it was the only way to do so without distracting him from the impending threat. She needed to trust in him, in his fighting skills. He was going to be fine. He had to. Ajax's determined gaze met hers from the corner of his eye, a daring smile tugging on his lips.
"Wouldn't dream of it, my princess."
As the Fae made her retreat, she spared one last glance at the knight she was leaving behind, praying with all her might that he would keep his word and make his way back to her.